Hi Year 5, happy Thursday, another week is nearly done. So yesterday we started planning our own finding story. So we're going to carry on that planning today. But we're going to think about the problem part of our story. So if you remember our story mountain back from the very first lesson, it's going to be the top of our mountain, the problem. So what I'd like you to do first of all is have a look at the work you completed yesterday. Remind yourself where your story is set, what the object is that your main characters will find, and what happens when they find that object. Off you go. So my story is set in the park. The object they're going to find is a water bucket, and the problem is that when the water bucket is found, a flood cascades out of the bucket and sweeps things away. So we're not going to do a generic planning lesson today. We're going to be writing some sentences that we can use when we're writing our own story. So first of all then, we're going to think about what happens just before the problem arrives. So I'm going to read you a couple of sentences from the model text, and then we're going to use this to write our own. So at that moment, the tables began to shake, the windows rattled, and the floor vibrated. Everyone stopped what they were doing, and the room fell silent. So if you can remember in our model text, this is when the spider is just about to come out of the game. So we need to think about what's going to happen just before our problem starts. So I like that we start with a time adverbial, at that moment. We could use at that moment, or you could use another time adverbial, maybe in an instant, in the blink of an eye, before anybody knew what was happening. There's lots of time adverbials you could use. Try and recap our work that we've done in literacy on time adverbials. I'm going to stick with at that moment for now, and then I'll see if I'm happy with it at the end. So remember, after my time adverbial I need a comma. At that moment, comma. So I need to think about three objects now that are in my park. So in our classroom we had tables, windows and the floor. So in my park I think I'm going to talk about the trees, the bench and the birds. So the trees first of all. So I'm going to say that the trees began to sway. So at that moment the trees began to sway. Comma, remember, because I'm listing again things that are happening, we need that punctuation. So then I said the bench. The bench shuddered. And now because we're talking about our last thing in the list, I need and, that conjunction. So, and the birds, I'm going to say they flew off. Birds are quite good at sensing something that's going to happen. So at that moment, the trees began to sway, the bench shuddered, and the birds flew off. Okay, so here it says everyone stopped what they were doing. I quite like that thought because I think the park's going to be full of people. I imagine it to be a nice sunny day and lots of people out. So everyone stopped what they were doing. I'm going to keep that in. I'm going to magpie that idea. Remember, there's no shame in taking bits that we like from other stories and using it in our own. So everyone stopped what they were doing, and the park fell still. Right, so at that moment, the trees began to sway, the bench shuddered, and the birds flew off. Everyone stopped what they were doing, and the park fell still. Shall I change at the moment? Yes, I think I am. I'm going to get rid of at that moment. I'm going to put in an instant. I'm going to use that comma. So it's very similar to the paragraph that I've just read. At that moment, the tables began to shake, the windows rattled and the floor vibrated. Everyone stopped what they were doing and the room fell silent. Mine then. In an instant, the trees began to sway, the bench shuddered, and the birds flew off. Everyone stopped what they were doing, and the park fell still. So again, it's that sentence of 3 descriptions that we used before, but this time instead of thinking about 3 verbs, we needed to think about 3 objects: trees, bench, and birds. So what I'd like you to do now then is pause my video. I'd like you to go and write yourselves a sentence of 3 description, but instead of thinking about verbs, I want you to think about 3 nouns. It might be helpful to list those 3 nouns first. List 3 things that are in your setting that something could happen to. Right, off you go. So hopefully then you've written a lovely few sentences that tells us what happened before the threat came. Now we're going to think about what happened when the threat first arrives. So here is an example from the model text. So I'll read it to you now. In the blink of an eye, an enormous spider, as big as a horse, shot out of the game and landed in the centre of the crowded classroom. Everyone froze. Its enormous hairy legs were tensed, ready to pounce, and its whole body seemed to pulse. 8 bulging eyes scanned the room. So now I'm going to write my paragraph about my flood. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through it. So again, we started off with another time adverbial. I like in the blink of an eye, but there's more we could use. I'm going to choose, I'll just underline that so we can see the difference. I'm just going to choose all of a sudden. And remember, as I mentioned in the last sentence, we need a comma. So all of a sudden, a roaring gush of water. So there's my problem. Again, I need a comma. I'm going to add here, as big as a horse. We've got a simile, haven't we? Now, we haven't spoken about similes in a while, but remember we could use, for simile, we can use as or like. So I'm going to say, as ferocious as a lion. I'm going to stick with this whole lion idea of roaring. So that's like a subordinate clause. It's like an added piece of information. Gives the reader a better picture in their head about your problem. So as ferocious as a lion. Cascaded, I love using that word. So it really shows the reader that my gush of water really leapt out of the bucket. So it cascaded out of the bucket. And so here it's talking about the spider landing in the centre of the crowd. My water first was going to cover the path, I think. But I want to add an adjective to describe the path so the reader's got a really good picture in their head. So my path, I think, is going to be like gravelly, I think. I can imagine it quite gravelly. So I'm just going to read it back because remember we need to keep reading back as we go. All of a sudden, a roaring gush of water, as ferocious as a lion, cascaded out of the bucket and covered the gravelly path. I think I'm going to sneeze. Sorry, Year 5. So, and now we've got a really short sentence here. Everyone froze. So the writer has used a lovely, complex sentence to start off with. And then he's gone straight to a short sentence. It's adding that idea of suspense, isn't it? Remember, one of the features in our suspense story is to use a variety of sentence structures. So we're going to do that too. So now I want to give a short sentence about what everybody did. So I can imagine people just edging away from the water. So people edged backwards. So there's my short sentence. So now we're talking about another feature of the threat. So I'm going to think about the waves now. Again, remember we were talking the other day about starting our sentences with a pronoun. I've already talked about the water. I've already introduced what my paragraph's about. I don't need to keep saying the water, the water, the water. So I'm going to use my pronoun it. So, its waves were rising, comma, ready to wash over everything in its path. See, I've already used the word path, haven't I, when I'm talking about the path in the park? So I might say to wash over everything in its way, actually, because I don't want to keep repeating the same words. And so we're talking about another part here. So it's underlying current. So remember, when you're in the sea, there's like a movement underneath, a force. So I'm really want the reader to picture this water as having a lot of force. And its underlying current seemed to gain ferocity. I love that word. We used it in our second lesson, didn't we? That's a word that I've plucked from the model text. So, underlying current seemed to gain ferocity. So now, our last sentence, 8 bulging eyes scanned the room. So the waves, I'm going to talk about the waves, and they're starting to get higher, so I'm going to say they lapped. It's a lovely verb, that is. Around, so I can imagine the trees standing there, in a bit of a personification maybe. They're standing there, they're frozen, they don't really know what to do, and this water's lapping around the bottom. So I can imagine the trees, they're going to be quite vulnerable because they haven't really got an escape. So I'm going to add that adjective in. So I'm really happy with that now. So all of a sudden, a roaring gush of water, as ferocious as a lion, cascaded out of the bucket and covered the gravelly path. People edged backwards. Its waves were rising, ready to wash over everything in its way. I'm actually not quite happy with the word wash. I feel like that doesn't make it sound scary enough. So its waves were rising, ready to crash. I like crash actually. That makes it sound more ferocious. So all of a sudden, a roaring gush of water, as ferocious as a lion, cascaded out of the bucket and covered the gravelly path. People edged backwards. Its waves were rising, ready to crash over. That's better. Everything in its way, and its underlying current seemed to gain ferocity. The waves lapped around the bottom of the vulnerable trees. Great. So, it's your turn now to go and write your paragraph where your few sentences where the problem first comes. Off you go, and then come back here to carry on. So hopefully now you've got a lovely few sentences. Remember, you can email them to us at year5@bluecoatfederation.co.uk. I know it didn't really feel like a planning lesson today. It felt more like a writing lesson, so it might feel a bit disjointed to you. But actually, we've planned a lot here. We've thought about 3 things that are going to happen before our problem comes, and then we thought about what happened when our problem actually came. So when we come to write our story on Monday, we've got like a whole page written for us already, haven't we? So for the rest of the time then, make sure you've got some lovely sentences. Remember, up-level them if you want to. Do you remember how I changed the word washed into to crash? That's your challenge to up-level it. Make sure it's okay. Send us a picture of your paragraphs, and then come back tomorrow where we're going to box up our whole story. Right, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.